Hello everyone, my name is Aaron Christensen. This is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, celebrating classic horror throughout history with new episodes every Friday night. Co-written and directed by Roman Polanski, Repulsion, released in 1965, explores the mental disintegration of a young foreign woman, Carole, expertly played by Catherine Deneuve, living alone in London. Polanski's first English-language film, and the first in his so-called apartment trilogy, followed by Rosemary's Baby and The Tenant, Repulsion explores themes of isolation and sexual and psychological trauma, as Carole experiences terrifying hallucinations and mounting paranoia when her sister goes away on holiday for 2 weeks. Polanski uses the elastic apartment space designed by Seamus Flannery and Gil Taylor's surreal, subjective camerawork to evoke Carole's crumbling psyche. With walls cracking, shadows looming, and hands emerging from walls, while Stephen Dalby's exquisite sound design and Chico Hamilton's moody jazz score further amplify her descent into madness. 60 years later, Repulsion remains a landmark in art house and horror cinema, as well as one of Polanski's most disturbing and influential works. We're going to be celebrating the 60th anniversary of Roman Polanski's Repulsion, and we got an amazing panel to chat about with me. Let's bring everybody in, and let's say hello to Elena Romea.
Hola, hello to everybody. Thanks for having me here.
Dodd Alley.
Thank you for having me. I'm both excited and repulsed to be here.
Tom Purr.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
And Matthew Amador.
Hey there. So glad to be back, especially talking about this movie, which is one of my favorites.
And we're going to be chatting about Repulsion from 1965, celebrating its 60th anniversary. And we will be talking spoilers. So if you haven't seen the movie, please go check it out and then come back and join our conversation already in progress. Thanks for coming on the show, everybody, and welcome. So as is my want, I love to hear people's how they came to the film for the first time. Elena, this is your first time on the show. Thanks. You're beaming in from Madrid, Spain. So good to have you. Elena contributed to the essay on the Paul Naschy film Hunchback of the Morgue for Hidden Horror. Elena, how did you come to this movie for the first time?
Well, I have watched this movie like 12 times. I don't remember. And I watched it for the first time when I was a teenager. And I was shocked because it's a very feminist topic. My relation with Polanski is kind of, complicated. But I have to admit that I love the movie, the syntax of the movie, the topics, the themes, everything.
Dodd, how about you? When did you come to this one for the first time?
Well, unlike the last two films that we discussed on here, Misery and Seven, those are both favorites of mine that I've seen countless times. Repulsion, I had only seen one time prior to this. I wanted to look for an excuse to revisit something that's a horror classic that I had not seen for a while. The first time I saw it was in film school. When I started, they gave me a list of films to dive into, and I remember Repulsion was one that I chose because I was a fan of Rosemary's Baby that Roman Polanski had directed. So that is only the one other time that I saw it. So other than seeing it this week, that was only the second time I've seen Repulsion. And I was excited to revisit it, and I enjoyed watching it.
Great. I'm looking forward to hearing what your experiences were from the first time to this most recent viewing. Tom, this is also your first time on the show. Thanks for coming on. What's your origin story with Roman Polanski's Repulsion?
Well, first, thanks for having me, Aaron. I'm really happy to be here. I came to Repulsion by way of Rosemary's Baby. Rosemary's Baby is one of my favorite films ever. I love it. I think it's perfect. And when I was a teenager, like Elena, I first heard about Polanski's apartment trilogy. And that's what brought me to Repulsion. And honestly, the first time I saw it when I was probably, like a teenager, I was kind of underwhelmed by it. And as a younger person, I thought it was kind of boring, to be honest. It's a lot more character driven. It's a lot less plot driven than Rosemary's Baby. So I don't think I was quite ready for it as a teenager. But then rewatching it as an adult and watching it again for the podcast, I've really grown to love it. So I can't wait to dive into it with you guys.
Cool. Yeah, Tom and I met at the Deep Cuts horror trivia evenings, and it's really fun to kind of come back around to these movies that maybe didn't jive with us the first time, maybe even not even the second time, but slowly you come to appreciate those. And it's one of the things I love about Deep Cuts Horror Trivia. Matthew, I'm really excited to hear your kind of origin story, because I also know you're a therapist. I expect this has certain resonance for you in a way that maybe it doesn't for everybody else.
Absolutely. I think that's, well, I first came to the movie. I was later to this movie. I think for me, it was early pandemic. I sat down to watch it. I was familiar with Catherine Deneuve from Dancer in the Dark, from Umbrellas of Cherbourg, from Belle de Jour, and I always knew that I loved what she brought to the screen. I was initially kind of just hesitant, I think, because of the Polanski of it all. And I'm sure we'll get into a conversation about art and artists and how we manage that going forward. But for me, it was partially because at that point I had been practicing psychotherapy for just a handful of years. So I had a new set of eyes and a new interest to kind of give it a shot. And oh my God, I watched it, then I watched it again. Then I couldn't tell other people about it. And then I thought I was going to watch it again, and instead I put on Possession instead of Repulsion. And I was like, oh, wait, get your names right.
Possession's a whole other animal. We will be talking about that one at some point on the show, because wow, what a movie that
Not
is.
quite as feminist, yeah.
Yeah, no. Similar to others, came to Rosemary's Baby first, but I remember seeing photos from Repulsion in various reference books, specifically the arms coming out of the walls that was inspired by Cocteau's Beauty and the Beast. There's also a similar image from Bedlam, the Val Lewton film, where you're seeing hands reaching out of the bars toward the heroine. And so I always kind of like mixed a few of those together. I'm like, which one is this? Which picture am I conjuring in my mind? Similar to you, Tom, this one was one that is definitely kind of slow moving. And I think as a younger viewer, it does not have the same resonance, but it is one that has absolutely become a favorite of mine on multiple levels. And yes, we will absolutely be discussing the complicated relationship as a viewer of Polanski, especially as his career went on. But this is very early in his career. This is his second feature film. This is after Knife in the Water made him kind of a big name in the art house world. Knife in the Water was nominated for Best Foreign Film, and that kind of gave him the cachet to do this movie in Britain. It was his first English language film. So yeah, Tony Tenser was one of those, he worked with British Lion, and he was part of that kind of new wave of English horror that was kind of counter to Hammer. He did things like Blood on Satan's Claw. He was involved in several of Pete Walker's films. So he was kind of a gutsier version of British horror. And this was him looking to kind of make his way into the horror avenue that had been created by the emergence of Hammer. He worked with Compton Films, which at the time was a smaller film production company. And they mostly dealt in erotic cinema. And they were looking to do something that was a little more mainstream. And so Tenser brought Polanski in on the strength of Knife in the Water and gave him a certain modest budget, thinking, okay, it's going to be in an apartment that's going to keep the budget down. It's going to be shot on actual, streets in London. So they were thinking it was going to be a much more modest affair. And Polanski being Polanski, he was looking to kind of explore larger things. So anyway, that's kind of some of the background, but I'm curious to hear, when I threw this list out there to folks, what was it about Repulsion that made you want to come on and chat about it? What is it about Repulsion that resonates for you? Matthew, do you mind we start off with you?
One aspect of it is actually its depiction of mental illness, its depiction of schizophrenia. All too often, when we see depictions of this on film, it's highly inaccurate, sensationalized to a large degree. Oh, we talked about this actually previously when I was on the Psycho podcast here. We talked about how oftentimes mental illness gets a little skewed. Film is a visual medium, so you can't always just be accurate. You have to. It's tricky. It's tricky. So one thing that keeps me coming back to this is looking honestly. It's not like I'm there with my copy of the DSM, like going through each individual diagnostic criteria, but you can see, oh, I see I see this, I see that. And the way that Deneuve plays it, she's not going over the top. She's not giving you John Lithgow in Raising Cain. She's giving you something that's very honest and heartbreaking. And the humanity of it all is what I come back to. Actually, because watching a film, we become an observer from the get-go, with just the opening credits. Those credits do not go how we expect them to go. We are now put in her point of view, where we are now not seeing the world as we expect it should be, yet we still accept it and we go forward. It just resonates with me so much.
Elena, how about you? You've said you've come back to this film many, many, many times. What is it about it, and what do you kind of keep getting as you peel back the onion? What resonates for you?
What I find interesting about this movie is that it's from the 60s. It's a horror movie in a way that is connected with previous short stories, as the ones from by Charlotte Perkins Williams as the Yellow Wallpaper, that also deals with schizophrenia and depression after giving birth, etc. That's kind of a very feminist theme. Here we have, the repulsion against, men, the sexual intercourse. We don't know exactly why. That's also the mystery of the moment. What I like the most is that's not another monster story with Frankenstein that I love, those movies with a vampire or whatever. We are dealing with a monster that's going to be very important in after some years. That is the monster inside oneself. That's, also the space of the house. I read an article when I was preparing for this that was the space of homeless, because it's not home, it's no home for Carole. That was very interesting. And all the psychology going around, I think it's a very modern vision of what the horror is going to be, but in 30 or 40 years' time. So that's what I like the most, apart from all the feminist, all the social problems, the problems of the rent, and also it's very European movie. So because Rosemary Baby is more American, but in this case it's very, very European, but not with the hammer monster or the things we have here. Very experimental. That's why I like it.
Great. Tom, how about you?
Sort of like Matthew, I find the movie almost overwhelmingly claustrophobic. I think Polanski does such an incredible job of putting you in the shoes of this character who is kind of falling apart. And watching it again, the most recent time I watched it, I was most struck by the sound design in the film. I think the sound design is so nuanced and immersive. So I mean, I'm thinking about like the rumbling and the cracking walls, the telephone ringing, the piano next door, the flies buzzing over the rabbit, even the sister's moans in her bedroom next to Carole's bedroom. And I think Polanski and the sound designer did just such an incredible job of using sounds to put you in Carole's shoes. So I'm thinking about how, like, when as she's descending, further and further into madness, the ticking of the clock quickens, and then towards the end, the gonging church bells kind of gong louder and faster. And so watching it this time, I found it like sonically really interesting. Deneuve is just incredible in it. It's her movie. Obviously, she carries the thing because most of it is her alone in this apartment essentially, and I think it's just such an incredible performance. So I think a main reason I go back to it now is just to see her because she's just so great in it.
God, how about you?
I think Repulsion stuck out to me on the list of films to choose from to talk about because, I saw it in 2005 for the first time. And knowing me back then in film school, I was probably over analyzing it because I was trying to be pretentious. So, a lot of times I like to revisit movies because maybe something has happened to me in my life since time has gone on that has affected the way that I think. So thinking back on what I remembered about Repulsion, both claustrophobic and feminist, I thought to myself, well, we've been through COVID-19 lockdown, one of the most claustrophobic things that I've been through, and we've also have read the headlines of everything that's happened with the Me Too movement. So Repulsion really stuck out to me because I said, at this point in time, I think this is a movie I really want to revisit, just to see if the way that my mind has been sort of formed and shaped over the years about what I think about things. I wonder if I would think differently about the film when I see it right now. So I think that's really what drew me to it. And also just remembering that the poster art was a straight razor, and that's just always something that just gets under my skin. the sight of a straight razor.
Matthew, your comment about the depiction of mental illness, it's interesting because I know that Polanski didn't do a ton of research about mental illness, and he was actually approaching it very much of, this chick going crazy in an apartment. That was kind of like his description of it. And so the fact that it becomes as nuanced and as authentic as it turns out to be is kind of a miracle as well. I think he was looking for what would be cinematically interesting. Tom, you talked about the sound design. Also, Gil Taylor's cinematography is quite extraordinary. It does get very much up in our faces. There's a lot of light and shadow. So I think he was looking, Polanski, purely from a sense of cinema, like what would be interesting. But we do get a sense of that kind of dream, nightmare, watching imagery, just kind of walls turning into clay and hands coming out of walls and things like that. But yes, with regard to like how it connects to Psycho, because I think this film, there is a line to be drawn from Psycho to this film as well. This is only 5 years later. How do you compare those two films in terms of their depiction of mental illness?
For me, one thing that stands out, actually, what you were just talking about now, that yes, maybe they just lucked into this depiction, possible. I love how it is a slow descent, and it is not what someone might think of as being more cinematic.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we think of, like Psycho, or even like Ellen Burstyn in Requiem for a Dream, where it's a much more cinematic version of someone breaking down.
I mean, like there's a dramatic build to those films, whereas this one, we ebb and flow.
Absolutely. And this has been around since 1965, but this vibe has been around for so long, and now it's probably being a little bit more popularized with A24 and the Uber that they're putting out right now. One thing that I really appreciate about this movie, as opposed to Psycho, Psycho wants you to believe that it makes narrative sense. The events happen because A led to B, led to C, led to D. There's a reading of this film where that is not the case. That is not the case. There is a reading where you can say, okay, there must have been some kind of initial trauma. There must have been initial sexual assault that makes her feel this way and go through these things with her mind. And the truly terrifying thing about mental illness for most folks is that it's not always logical. Mm-hmm. We want to impose a logical narrative onto it. It's not the case. It's not the case. It doesn't make sense, logical sense, why someone might see something. It doesn't make logical sense why someone might feel depressed. It doesn't make logical sense why someone might want to take their own life. These things don't always have a clear ABCD narrative. And I think that this film does a really good job leaving a lot of room for ambiguity.
In terms of how it contrasts with Psycho, I mean, in Psycho, we're minus literally the very last shot of the film. We're never really in Norman's mind. Where in Psycho, we're on the outside looking in. I mean, minus the voiceover at the very end, we don't see what he sees. We don't hear what he hears. And in Repulsion, I mean, we're constantly in Carole's mind, and we're seeing and hearing what she sees and hears. So I think that might play into, like what Matthew was saying, that kind of helps explain why Repulsion is a lot less like narrative based, because it's so subjective, and it puts us squarely in Carole's shoes. So I think that maybe helps explain why Psycho feels a lot more like linear and narrative based, and Repulsion maybe feels a lot more subjective and like character based, because in Repulsion we're on the inside looking out instead of Psycho.
Well, when I was thinking about this movie, I have a tendency of connecting everything. I never thought about Psycho, but I thought about Hitchcock, but about I thought about Spellbound. That's is from 1945, if I'm not wrong. I was just searching. In which this woman cannot remember things, and all the dreams. Images are designed by Salvador Dali. That's also part of the worlds that we can find in the house Repulsion. And also I thought of Rebecca, that's based on Daphne du Maurier novel, because also we are that's working from the perspective of the woman. So I want to talk about Psycho. That's when you say Psycho, I say what? Never came to my mind. But it has a lot of Hitchcock in the way the movie is constructed. The light, dark, is very impressionist in that way. But I would go more for Spellbound.
Matthew, I've really been thinking about this with you drawing the parallels to Psycho. And what comes to mind for me when you're talking about sort of being outside the mind of Norman Bates was at the very end, I can't remember if it's a detective or a psychologist who shows up to explain the disorder to the characters and to the audience. And this guy just kind of shows up, well, Norman has a multiple personality disorder. He likes to wear his mom's clothing. And I was thinking to myself, that would have ruined this movie for me. And I'm glad that it does have so much subjectivity and that there wasn't someone who showed up conveniently at the end. Well, it turns out your sister has past trauma, and they go in and just kind of unfold everything. They leave a lot up to the imagination because the human psyche and these things in life are just, they're gray areas sometimes. And I like it that the film just kind of leaves it with a shot of the photo, and it kind of leaves much up to the imagination and just kind of trying to figure out for yourself what could or may not have anything to do with what transpires in this film.
Fact is, we don't get a lot of firm answers. I mean, even to the point that like the sisters are both speaking with French accents in England. And I've read a lot of things that say they're from Belgium, but the only thing we get from that is that the photo was taken in Belgium or in Brussels. It's not necessarily that's where they grew up. I mean, yes, there is a French speaking portion of Belgium. You could assume that, but it is just an assumption. We just know that the photo was taken there, but they could both be French. And the idea of the photo, we see a picture of a young girl who is staring off camera as opposed to looking at the camera like everybody else. But whatever we draw from that is purely from us. It is not told to us, this means that. The fact that she's looking off camera, or she's looking at that particular person in the photo, and you end up drawing your own narrative from that. And I think that's one of the things I really like about this film is it does invite the audience, the viewer, to lean in, to engage. It's not going to spell it all out for you.
I feel like that's another point of comparison with Psycho, like with what Dodd was saying, that at the end of Psycho, the psychiatrist comes out and explains everything. It's almost like the photo at the end of Repulsion is like Polanski's version of the psychiatrist speak. Like that's as much explanation as he's willing to give us. Right. Instead of a great big monologue, an 8-minute monologue from a professional, he just gives us a shot of a photo. And that's like the background that he's willing to disclose.
Well, and that photo has been there in plain sight the entire time. It has been referred to by other characters. And we think, oh, well, the answer was there all the time. It's like, what answer? There is no real answer being provided. And I love that from Polanski, that he is just kind of offering, well, if you want to try and explain it, here's another clue. But that's all he's willing to give you.
I will say this time around, Dodd, you were speaking of the sound design, I believe. I did have one reading where I thought, well, I mean, if there was a bell going off nightly in the middle of the night, I might slowly unravel as well.
People who live by the L and hear the L rumbling by every 10 minutes all day. Yeah.
Well, and after a while, you just don't hear it anymore. And everybody's like, how do you live with this? And you're like, live with what? What are you talking about? If we talk about the sound design, I think we have to talk about the music as well. because it is a beautiful jazz score by Chico Hamilton. It takes us on a lot of different journeys, right? It has the melancholy tone of Carole's walk, when she's out on the streets of London, but also is just like some really crazy dissident sound cues while she's in the apartment alone.
When you're talking about the music score that happens on the street, well, that's when they are following, Catherine Deneuve, Carole's in the streets, because we only see the forehead, the head here. It reminds me of, this movie. I don't know the name in English because we normally change the whole titles. So it's The Fighter. It's with Mickey Rourke, the wrestler. Okay, thank you. It fits perfectly well. What I like the most is that the music is not all the time on screen. It's something that gets me on my nerves from the old movies, that you have all them and now you have to be scared, and now you need to laugh, and now and the music all the time. For me, it's very confusing. Also, when they refer to the bells, there is a moment in which the sister's lover say, "Oh, all the time of the bells. Don't you get crazy with this? Whatever." And every time is something bad is going to happen, we have the bells.
I'm always a fan of a jazz score, especially when it comes to something that's talking about themes of disorganization, themes of hallucination. I mean, I think it's very Lynchian. At the same time, was it Lost Highway? I think also has like a jazz score. It goes along with it. Yeah, where it's the improvisation, the structure of how that genre of music goes. It doesn't unsettle you in a sense that it brings unease. However, or at least not me personally, but it does bring you into a sense of just not knowing what to expect next, and it really just sets you up for something, like Elena says, where it's not going to dictate. It's not going to. It's not going to be a sweeping John Williams score that's going to say like, and now feel this way. It's going to just set you up to be like, what will it be? It brings curiosity. That's what it is. It brings curiosity. It does not overindulge or coerce you towards one thing or another.
Yeah, there's kind of an improvisational feel to it. It does feel like it's just kind of organically happening. And, in the same way that Carole is constantly being assaulted by things that she doesn't expect. But then there's also just those moments of calm where, she is just sitting at home in an apartment with a rotting rabbit 6 feet from her.
I think the one thing that stuck out to me, and a lot has been covered here with the jazz score, I was sort of obsessed with the spoon playing buskers, which I found out after I watched the movie. I think Polanski was one of those guys in the movie. But just on these streets scenes with these unbroken takes, at first I thought to myself, oh, cool, how charming, street performers. But then they almost kind of invade the street space that she's walking on, and almost kind of create this sense of overstimulating chaos that this character doesn't want, even though objectively I find it kind of charming. Through her perspective, I'm kind of going, no, stay on the sidewalk. Right. Don't come out here where I'm standing. So that's one thing that really stuck out to me. I was obsessed with the buskers.
That moving backwards, again, everything feels just a little dreamish. That jumped out at me as well. When they enter into the street, well, that's not where you belong. You belong on a street corner. You belong on a street. You should not be out in traffic and everyone kind of having to deal with you.
I was thinking about a parallel with Rosemary's Baby, because both movies have this footage of like a young woman walking the streets while a jazzy score plays, So even though Rosemary's Baby and Repulsion, I feel, are very, very different, I feel like that's one like little stylistic touch that carries over into Rosemary's Baby, of the footage of Mia Farrow walking the streets while the jazzy music plays. And then in terms of a favorite moment, I loved the moment where Carole first presses her palm into the wall and she sees her fingerprints. I think the music is just like a solo guitar that's playing like really slowly while she lifts her hand and sees like her prints in the wall. And in terms of like favorite musical moments, that one really stood out to me watching it this time. I thought it was just a really like unsettling and like dreamy and kind of beautiful moment in the movie.
Well, and it's not a jump scare, right? There's not even like a musical cue to like go, oh, fingerprints are left in wall, you must feel this way. That nightmare quality of just things being weird and uncanny, but not necessarily being told how to feel about it. I'm glad you brought up Rosemary's Baby, because that was Krzysztof Komeda who did the score for that. And he was also Polanski's composer for Knife in the Water. And he would also work again on Fearless Vampire Killers. So there is that love of jazz. I think it was a cost thing. It was a budget thing that didn't allow him to bring Komeda onto this film, but he really loved Chico Hamilton's music. And so he was happy to have another jazz artist doing the score for this film. There's this great push and pull of high energy and low foreboding. And then there's also those moments of absolute silence, where the sound just cuts out. Notably during the, assault nightmares. I've heard them described as fantasies by other critics. And I'm kind of curious to hear what people's thoughts are, especially through 2025's eyes. Is this a fantasy of Carole? Is this a nightmare for Carole? Like what's actually going on for her?
Well, in the case of all the nightmares, fantasies, we don't know. I think Matthew can, I'll pass to interpret this as something that's more psychological. I'm not prepared for that. It reminds me in some of the cases, not to Baudelaire, but the Buñuel's works, as for the example, An Andalusian Dog, in which he's also obsessed with the eyes and the different perspectives of the eyes. That's something that's going to be also repeated through, cinema history. And that is also taken from the Russians, from Bertov and all these, because also we have the eye and all the different looks of the different eyes. And in that case, it reminds me of the Andalusian Dog in the case of fantasies. In the case of nightmares, we are just dealing with surrealism in some parts, I think. So
we're definitely we'll circle back around and talk about kind of like that feeling of a woman under assault there. But your idea, the Andalusian Dog in Chien Andalou, going back to the opening credits, we have Maurice Binder, who designed those opening credits, who did a lot of the James Bond opening credits. He has the line, the credit for Roman Polanski going across the eye. And that is, Polanski is absolutely referencing Un Chien Andalou. But the idea of, watching the credits kind of roll up the eye, it is truly, we are getting into the eye of the beholder, like how Carole sees the world.
From a narrative point of view, if you look at them narratively, yes, it could be a nightmare, a memory of a previous assault. It could easily be that. I think there's something about the readings that vibe most for me. The fact that there is no score underneath it makes it truly terrifying for me. There's something very unsettling about not having any music, about the silence. However, there's still sound going around in the world. It's just not from this, which makes me think the other things that are getting on her last nerve, the other things that are infecting her are real world sounds that we hear. But this is not. This doesn't have a real world sound. So there is no actual man assaulting her, nor might there actually be an actual memory of this. Frequently, people who hallucinate don't always, it's not based on something that actually happened. Like the more linear version is, yes, it's this thing that you experienced and you're remembering it, and it's like a PTSD thing where you're reliving it that way. But that's not the case. I've worked with people who have heard the devil talking to them on the telephone. I don't think these people have actually met the devil or had phone conversations with them. I personally don't. So they're not bringing that into their own life. It's a fantasy, in quotes, but it's a dark fantasy. It's not necessarily something that they eroticize necessarily, or something that they wish would happen. We can have dark fantasies about like anxiety, dark fantasies about, oh my gosh, this is going to happen and I'm going to lose my house. Oh my God, this is going to happen and someone's going to leave me. And that's a dark fantasy that we can have. It's still in the fantasy umbrella, the fantasy umbrella of Cherbourg, but it is not a positive one. One reason why I don't necessarily think of it as being like a sexual, it's a dark fantasy about a sexual act. I don't see it as a push-pull, like, oh, I want it so badly, and why I don't see that at all. I actually see the actual repulsion. When she sees items of the boyfriend just strewn around, she sees the shirt, and she smells it, she's repulsed by it. She's not taken in. I think there are some times when the hands are out of the walls, when the hands come out of the walls, and she's almost like a cat, like almost like kind of like stroking around them, then there could be some exploration. It reads to me there's an exploration of what physical touch can bring, what sensuality can bring to it. Even when I think one of them cups her breast at the time when she's standing up, there can be some there. However, when it comes to a human being, these men are not welcoming. They are not a place for exploration or for safety. And that's not even just in the fantasies. All of these men are awful. This is a world of terrible, terrible men.
Yes. Yeah.
Which in another way it allows you to step into her shoes and be like, oh no, I get it. I get it. Yeah, you don't want him to kiss you. He's really bad.
I'm not quite sure what it means. Maybe one of you can chime in on this. But I thought it was interesting that after one of the dark fantasies, Matthew, I liked how you phrased that it's like a dark fantasy. And I would agree with that interpretation, because after one of those fantasies, she wakes up the next morning naked on the floor. I thought that was really interesting. Like, it's obviously this interaction with these men in her bedroom is in her mind, but she's like reacting to it, it seems, in the real world as well. Like, it's not 100% in her head, and that we see that she's like physically responding to these interactions in the real world.
I immediately had that thought as well. I'm like, well, someone took her clothes off, whether it was her, whether it was this fantasy. At least for the first one, we don't know that it didn't happen. You know, when we are first introduced to that man in her bed, we think there's a man in her bed, you know, and it's only later that we go, did that actually happen? We're not sure. And then when it happens again, and we recognize that it's the street worker that she walks past, unless that is him that is actually broken into her house, this is something that she is drawing in. One of the lines that jumped out at me this time, it's the first line of the film, from the client asking, have you fallen asleep? Carole is constantly drifting in and out of her own mental state and engaging with the real world. And I feel like that is done so very well, both by Polanski and by Catherine Deneuve's performance.
Catherine Deneuve, to her credit, catatonia is not a very cinematic thing to try to craft a movie around.
Right.
And my God, she does a fantastic job of being in this negative state. And part of it is, yes, she's beautiful, but she's bringing this sense, this aura with her. There's a dark cloud around her that she's bringing there, where even when she is not present, she is still she's still present. Her aura is still present.
Okay, I loved when, he's nailing the door with the boots, because it looks like they say, okay, you have to put this here, and do you have like a hammer? Just try, because it's very real. At the beginning, it's ropey note. I don't know how to do it. I love that part because she does it really, really well. And also the catatonia thing, I love it when she's like, and people say like, say something, do something. And she's just looking at the razor and the potatoes around in the kitchen, the fish is like, and the telephone's ringing. And I think she does really, really well. She's kind of, the face of him.
I love the moment of her like kind of brushing her face and her nose. So like it's a very expressive performance too. I love when she's in kind of like the break room at work and she's left alone. And then the camera just kind of sits and stays on her in the chair for a few seconds. And then she leans over and like brushes the chair next to her. I mean, she has such an expressive face, which we see in a lot of these close-ups and these extreme close-ups. But I also love those like quiet moments where the camera almost steps back and kind of watches her from afar.
The first 15 minutes of this film, if I were to see a performance like hers in a movie today or in a film released in at any time for that matter, I would almost at first, if I were to prejudge the performance, it kind of reminds me of when in contemporary films, someone decides to put a random supermodel in a movie with no acting experience, because one could conclude possibly from her performance at first that she's just not given very much to work with. I mean, her line delivery is minimal. It doesn't seem like she's doing much, but as the film unfolds, the complexity of her performance to me was well understood. She's repressing so much, and rather than sort of right from the get-go having this flamboyant performance where she's just freaking out, you realize she's bottling a lot up in her mind, and that becomes more and more evident as the film unfolds. So with that being said, that's what's so great and nuanced about her performance in this film.
Tom, what you had just mentioned about the camera being able to pull back, catatonia, when people describe it, they talk of the symptoms are called negative symptoms. And negative symptoms doesn't mean that someone's being like a little asshole or something like that, or they're really just pessimistic. It means the absence of something. So it's thinking like negative space is like the absence of something in this space. And being able to pull back and be able to see her as a part of negative space, which is also there with the lighting in the apartment. It is all this negative space. We're just captivated by it. We're drawn in to it as opposed to being repulsed by it.
Yeah, there's a line, "We must get this crack mended," that she says to her sister. Oh, we're not just talking about the crack in the wall. I'm starting to feel myself come apart. Her fascination with cracks on the sidewalk and then those that manifest in the apartment, there is just that sense of, as you said, Dodd, she's holding it together, but with great effort. And she's constantly just on the edge of breaking.
The thing I forgot to bring up when I was talking about the performance, and when her, let's call him her would-be suitor, kicks the door down, just her calmness at that point is just almost kind of eerie, that she's not reacting the way that somebody would when somebody kicks your door down.
I forget who mentioned it, but the men in this film are not presented in a very positive light. There is not a good man in this entire movie. And so I just wanted to talk about the film's depiction of men and perhaps its viewpoint of men.
I just think it's really fascinating how her fears and fantasies do come true, because she's having these dark fantasies of these men breaking into her room and assaulting her. That does eventually happen, right? Where her suitor literally kicks her door down to get into her apartment. And speaking of watching this movie from the lens of 2025, watching that scene, I was like, geez, like, I can see why she attacks him, because he broke into her apartment. And then, of course, the landlord coming in and propositioning her and forcing himself on her. So I just thought it was interesting that the fears do become real in a sense as these forces from the outside world kind of swarm into the apartment.
Yeah, her fears of men prove to be completely justified.
I gave the example before of having the client that heard the devil talk on the telephone. That's not quite as real, and we can write that off. But when it comes to these being informed guesses, informed hallucinations, as opposed to just something completely out of nowhere, that's terrifying and adds to the ambiguity.
I was noticing in the interactions, because we've already touched on more extreme reactions or things that men do, like kick the door down and the landlord, which I'm sure we'll talk about more here in a minute. But going back to her street interactions with Colin, the suitor, there were times I noticed when he would just reach out and touch her inappropriately, like not full-on sexual grope, but just already he was violating those boundaries, little ways that he would touch her when he was talking to her. That kind of made me cringe. And then it made me wonder as I'm watching this is 1965. So while I was not around back then, I'm assuming this is still the era of bosses groping secretaries and things like that. And it made me wonder, was anyone as creeped out by these touches that I'm noticing in this film back then as I am right now? It's kind of a question that was lingering in my mind.
Well, one of the things that jumped out at me was that he's the one who makes the dinner plans, and she never actually acquiesces to them or accepts them. It's, we're going to meet here, we'll do this at this time. And then he gets very upset when she doesn't show up for their quote date. Yes, a lot is taken for granted, and he feels like he has the right to break into her apartment because he has big feelings. I'm in love with you and I don't know what to do about it. I'm like, all of this seems manifested on his side of things. It isn't necessarily anything that she has given to him. Elena, being our sole female panelist, I would love to hear your perspectives on the film as well.
Well, when I told you that the older I get, the more I understand Carole, that was this reason. Because you as men don't realize certain things that are going around. We women know, and we watch, these behaviors. If this kind of behaviors like, sensual harassment, cinema, I don't know, offices, etc., are happening today. Imagine what's in the 60s. They are two sisters that are, single. One of them is a lover of a married man. So she is supposed to be a virgin, Carole. She's very beautiful. And all men want to conquer her. Is this an object for all the men in the movie? She's just an object. It's very interesting the decision that she's working in a beauty salon because she's surrounded by women with different problems with men, all related to sex. Because the workmate also comments something about the boyfriend, and there is something that I think is related to that the boyfriend has been unfaithful or something like that. It's like men are corrupted by the sexual, feeling. They think they have the right to do whatever they want on women that are still. If you look, I'm going to give you an example from, Spanish, Italian cinema. You love Gialli, you love Polanski's movies, in which women are just objects there for Polanski to fall in love with him. Or just, for example, in the Gialli, a lot of women are slashed on their faces, are killed. So this is something a woman has to face every day nowadays. So just imagine in the past. So I think in that way it's really, really accurate, and it could create a paranoia. We women, I don't know in the United States, but for example here in Spain and in Europe in general, there is a movement that says that we want to come back home alone and alive. Because when you are a woman on the street at night, it's really, really dangerous. We always have little things, little weapons or something like that to feel secure. For example, in the United Kingdom, there is a secret message that you have to tell someone, another woman. I'm not going to tell here, so the other woman will understand. So if that is happening nowadays, what will happen in the past? When I was a teenager and I was home alone, I always put under my mattress a knife because I didn't feel safe and I was home and the door was locked. So just imagine. That's my point of view. I think that's very good, well represented through the movie.
Yeah, that it's not safe to be a woman in this world.
Just this world. just this world, not just the world of the film.
Yeah. The world that exists, the world that humans are occupying. And as you said, Elena, I think it's as true now as it was 60 years ago.
Elena, based on what you were saying, I was listening to a comedian, and she was saying recently, she's like, men, you're going to be the death of me. Statistically, yes.
And it is interesting that the other women in the film are the ones we see at the beauty salon, which again is, if not explicitly, certainly tangentially tied to sex and trying to be attractive for the opposite sex. We have the woman who is having her nails worked on that Carole wounds, and you have to wonder what that was about. Like, what is that attack on the woman? You mentioned her coworker, right? And that's the one time that we see Catherine Deneuve get to explore joy. But considering who we have come to learn Carole is, you have to wonder how genuine is that joy? Is she just putting on a face, mirroring, her office mate's reaction to the Charlie Chaplin film? That was one thing that really jumped out at me this time. Like, I don't think she really is finding this funny. I think she's trying to act like a human being, or what she thinks a normal human being acts like.
Like an alien in a person suit.
Yeah, she's trying to pretend to be, quote, normal.
Something that's caught my attention now that you're talking about that movie, I don't remember, but they never turned the TV on. They never turned the radio on. She never listens to music, and she never dances. So it's kind of surprising. And the only reference to an entertainment thing is the Charles Chaplin movie that the other has has seen, and maybe it's because the sister is only worried about surviving. Okay, like I need money. This man is married. I don't care. I want to go to Italy. It's the only way I can go. So I will call them survivors. She never, in the case of Carole, she never let herself to be entertained, to feel good, to be normal. I don't know if something inside her head, or it's a kind of restriction from the family that's kind of surprising.
AC, you were talking about interactions with other women characters, but what sticks out to me now, just made me think of, they aren't necessarily interactions, but the nuns playing basketball in the distance are the other women interpreted in this film. And that really had me thinking, nuns historically known as being repressed, they're out there playing b-ball outside the apartment. And it really is a significant moment where it shows just if she's still in this apartment, she's watching nuns having a blast. And I really stuck out to me.
The nuns are having a better time than she is.
Yes.
There was also something about her boss at the beauty salon when they were out of the fire and ice nail polish. Her boss just says, "It's okay. Just give her this. She'll never know the difference." Teaching that lies are absolutely just part of the world. Her sister, Helen, played by Yvonne Furneaux, who Hammer fans will recognize from The Mummy. She has a very distinct line of, "Don't worry about it. It's my affair." Like literally, it's her affair that she's having that nobody needs to worry about. It is another lie. It is another deceit that carries on. Michael, her lover, played by Ian Hendry, his wife calls the apartment and threatens Carole. Again, it's not even Carole's affair, but she's having to take the punishment for it. She's having to suffer for not turning in the rent, but really it's her sister who hasn't paid for the rent. Carole is taking on a lot of these abuses that she did not invite in, that she has no control over.
So interesting. When you're bringing up the boss, that's the one, that line this time around stuck out to me. She won't know the difference, as being another external narrative kind of reinforcing that, women, they just can't discern. You can't, it's okay. She won't know. Yeah, she won't be able to know what's real from what's not, what's fire from what's ice. What
calls my attention is that, for example, the boss at the beauty salon is the only one that's taking care of her, because it's when she has that breakdown, she goes and says, "Are you okay? What's happening?" etc. So it's the only one who worries about her, because the sister doesn't care.
Right.
And the co-worker is obsessed with the boyfriend. So the only one who's taking like the mother role is the boss, and I think that's very cute. That's a very cute character in relation to Carole.
What's interesting though, Elena, is that she's also the one who's like, "Hey, I was back at work like 2 days after I gave birth." Like, she's like, "Buck up, kid." She's very much of women's role is to suffer and carry on. Like things are going to be hard, and then just get on with it. And that seems to be kind of her approach to it, is that she doesn't have a lot of empathy or care for her clients or for her coworkers. It's a means to an end. It's so that she can continue to run her business.
Don't you think, because, the woman who has the dog, the neighbor,
right.
That I think is single, it's like a spinster, and is considered, like the happiest woman in the movie.
Right. She's got her dog and she's fine.
No husband, nothing else.
I was struck by how everybody in Carole's orbit seems to just have to be missing all the warning signs that no one seems to pick up that there's clearly something going on with Carole. And I feel like in the opening minutes of the film, it's clear that she's not well. And if someone, if you're at work with someone and they're supposed to be working and they're sitting on a chair staring at the ground, not responding to you, something's going on here. And no one seemed like her suitor, her sister, no one seems to be aware of that. I mean, her coworker finds a part of the rabbit in her purse,
right.
And that's kind of like almost like a shock moment in the movie. And the music kind of picks up, and we see her gasp, and but there are all these like blatant signs that something really bad is coming if it hasn't already come, and people seem to either ignore it or be oblivious to it.
Well, Tom, it's funny you mentioned that moment, like that should be, that's the biggest red flag, but nothing comes of it. Nothing is said about it. We see it, the coworker sees it, but nothing comes of it. And what you were just talking about, like the idea of we see those red flags, they either don't have the bandwidth to deal with it, they don't know what to do with it, or they just find it an inconvenience for what they want from Carole. I'm sure we see people have red flag moments all around us, as just all of us on this panel, but we're busy doing our thing. And we think, oh, I should probably deal with that, or I wonder if there's something I could do about that. But we may not have the tools, and we may not have the time.
One thing that I think this does well in that regard is so often people with mental health concerns, they don't always pop up immediately. You don't always get to see an acute episode. These are things that slowly build up, and people don't recognize it. They know something might be a little off, and they suspect, but they can't quite put their finger on it. There was the one time when the sister and the lover are in the elevator. The lover makes some offhand comment like, "Oh, well, you should really, take her somewhere." And there's this moment where the sister just goes, "What do you mean?"
Right.
And in that moment, I'm like, she suspects. She knows there's something there.
Yeah.
I get the same thing with the closing picture of the photograph. Maybe there has been something a little off. It hasn't been this, but there's been something, and no one's quite been able to pinpoint it.
There's the scene when she's walking down the street and there's the car accident in the background, and she pays it. Everybody else is looking at the car accident, and she continues to just move along. And again, it's one of those things it's things that are happening in the background that we should notice. The fact that she walks by a car accident and pays it no mind, that should be an indicator for us. And it is an indicator for us, the viewer, but nobody else catches it.
That kind of struck me as the accident almost being like a light that was attracting a bunch of moths. And she had this moment to just, for once, have
nobody was
be able to walk down the sidewalk without guys barging into her space. And that's kind of what came to my mind. She's like, "Oh, great, they're all over there. I'm gonna stay over here and just keep on walking."
One other thing that we talked briefly about the murder, but there's murders in this movie. And I think that's kind of what makes it a quote horror movie. I think it does kind of stride that line of like whether it's a horror or a thriller. But yes, she murders her would-be suitor, Colin, when he breaks in, and she bludgeons him to death with that beautiful shot, that subjective shot of him looking through the keyhole and then drifting down the door and then watching her basically pound his face in. But then we also have the murder of the landlord, which is such a slow escalation, pushing boundary violation.
It's very interesting how these two scenes differ from one to the other, because as you said, one goes faster than the other. The first one, Colin enters. Also, the perspective from the back of the house is very, very interesting. He's someone that is entering without permission, and there is a trigger in her mind, something that's this is not well. It reminds me of my nightmares, etc. And it goes like very fast in the different scenes and in the edition of the movie. But in the case of the landlord, at the beginning, in my case, when I was rewatching it, at the beginning, you don't see, this sexual thing. Everything is happening. It goes really, really slow. Also, it's just a scene you're looking from here. It's not so depth from the perspective. But suddenly, when she looks at the picture, it's like one step after the other and after the other and after the other. And then, because we didn't mention, but the importance of the different objects through the movie is quite relevant, in my opinion. The rabbit, the potatoes, the razor as well. All these have a meaning that's going to be essential in order to understand the whole thing. But it goes little by little, and there's a moment that says she's not going to kill him. She's not going. He's going to go with that money, and I think it's very interesting because the thrilling goes up, 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 and it's very, very slow. The pace is really slow, but you are stuck on the sofa or on the chair. Just, he's going to kill him or not.
Yeah.
So I think it's very well recreated to the rhythm and the tone.
I was noticing when she killed Colin, when she chose to deliver that first blow. And I don't know, in a lot of instances, you would think it would be right after he kicked down the door. It's like, oh, there's this intruder in here, but she stays calm. But the door's open, and this neighbor, who I think is rightfully nosy in this particular instance, is standing there. So the door is open to the world. There's a transparency where people on the outside can see what's going on. It seems like she delivers that first blow to take him out when he goes to close the door. Right. And sort of close off this door from the outside world, because she knows it's now or never. This is going to get really dangerous when he closes this door, and I am in this small space with him. That's when she does it.
They're slow, like Elena said, and they're messy too. It's certainly stylized, but there's nothing kind of like glamorous about the murders. They're very messy. They're not like these perfectly orchestrated events. They're stretched out. She has to like drag him on the carpet to the bathroom, and we can like we get an impression of like how difficult it would be to do something like that. Howland's death gives me one of my favorite shots in the film too, where after she drags him to the bathroom and like dumps him in the full bathtub, and his body kind of flips around, and this like ribbon of blood comes out of his mouth under the surface in the bathtub, which is a really disturbing and beautiful shot.
Yeah, I feel like it's a callback to both Les Diaboliques and Blood and Black Lace. It's like we've got these two great bathtub murders, and this is a third. I think it's a wonderful scene. I love what you're talking about in terms of the messiness, because when she kills the landlord, she slashes him on the back of his neck, which is not something we are used to seeing. We're always used to seeing the slash across the throat, and the fact that it comes across the back of his neck and it happens without any blood, and there's not like any spurting of blood, the arterial spray, and you see him kind of like grabbing the back of his neck, like, did that just happen? Because that's how a razor cut would work. And then she proceeds to slash him to death. Again, with that very erratic camera movement.
Those two scenes are fantastic because they're pretty justified or justifiable. You can see why, while you may not feel completely in her brain, you don't know exactly what Carole is thinking. You do get the sense of like, oh wait, but this is where I absolutely sympathize, or this is where I empathize. Yeah, get this person out of my house, because this apartment is her sanctuary. Yeah. Even if she has a distorted view of it, if rooms seem bigger, if hallways, like if there's a distorted sense of what this is, the world outside is not so kind. The spa that she works at, like, oh my God, she's walking around, people are bumping into her all the time. I'm like, this is a very busy, messy world out there. Let her have her apartment. I found myself this time when everyone's discovering the murders and like, oh, what's happening? They're all peeking in the apartment. Previously, I've seen it as being like an exhale after feeling so claustrophobic, like, oh, look, we opened the drapes, we let some sun in, we let some oxygen into this place. And this time around, I found myself being really sad. Yeah. I'm like, get out of her house. Yeah. This was her sanctuary. Oh my God, this is even worse. Everyone is coming in now, and she worked so hard to keep them all out.
Come to think of it, everyone gathering in her apartment at the end almost feels like an echo of the car crash earlier in the film that she walks past.
No, that's a great observation, Tom. I agree. It felt like, here they all are watching her at her worst moment. And yet, when Ian Hendry is carrying her out, that is the calmest she's ever been throughout the movie. I won't say she's at peace, but she definitely feels like she's not here anymore. She's not in that place of pain anymore, whether she's had a mental break or whatever. Like, she's in the arms of a man and able to not be repulsed by it. And I thought that was it's an interesting place for Polanski to leave us and that character.
Something that stuck out to me in that scene, and it almost kind of seemed like there was an emphasis on it by Polanski on purpose. But as everyone's coming to the apartment, there's this one old man in his robe who comes in, and they focus on him, and he goes into the room where the landlord was killed, like that den. And then they make a point of showing him coming out with sort of this kind of shaking his head almost in disgust. And it made me wonder if he found the body of the landlord, if like what the reason for including that focus on him going in and out of the den was. I don't know if anyone picked up on that.
Maybe it was his landlord and he's happy he's dead.
Don't have to pay rent this month.
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything. I saw him under the couch, but I'm just going to.
Matthew, you talked about the distortion, and we have to mention Seamus Flannery, who is our art director, and because this was in a set. This was an actual set that was built in Twickenham Studios, and we have those elongated rooms. We actually see the ceilings, which is not normal in most of these apartment movies, because it's difficult to light. Our cinematographer, Gil Taylor, he talked about how thrilling this movie was for him, that Polanski really challenged him to do things that he was not prepared to do. And I mean, Gil Taylor, had worked for Kubrick. He would later go on and do the cinematography for Star Wars, Flash Gordon. So he's done all sorts of these grand films, but the idea of like, here, we're going to trap you in an apartment that keeps changing shape and shifting. Matthew, did you have any thoughts on like what that, what that's indicating, or the kind of the set design?
The skewed perspective. Similarly, when M. Night Shyamalan's Unbreakable, they talk about visual cues in comic books of how to show that the villains have a skewed perspective of the world by having larger eyes or whatnot. Similar to that, now we have, this is her reality. This is her rubber reality that she has here, is that these rooms are grander. This is all her space. When she's looking at something, she's not really looking at it. She's looking through. Oh my gosh, I just described her as Michael Myers from Halloween. She has this skewed perspective of what's there. And we know it's true and we know it's not true. That's what can be so unsettling about something like schizophrenia, is that both of these things can be true at once. I used to live in a place where the person below me had hallucinations like that. And she was both aware that I lived above her, and at the same time, overlapping, there was another situation happening above her. So she would talk to me, acknowledging that I lived above her, and also saying this is happening at the same time. It's just a bleed through of reality. And I think this is a way of making that cinematic.
I read an article about the architecture of the movie, especially based on the apartment, that talks about how the Carole's mind is reflected in the whole map of the apartment. That's what kind of interesting. And also some days ago, on Instagram, a video about Rosemary Baby came across, and I was very surprised because in this case, in Repulsion, everything is so in light and darkness, and is playing with these two things, darkness meaning what's happening inside her mind, etc. But in the case of Rosemary Baby, Polanski is doing exactly the same, but with doors and walls. I'm going to be bad explaining this, but let me try. I saw the video, look for it, and they just draw a line when you can see the main character, the woman, and how all the cult members of Rosemary Babies are just placed behind the door, behind the wall, because it's dividing, the image, the frame. And it's very interesting because it's the same resource, but doing in different ways. This together with all the architecture theme of the cycle, and also the architectural theme of the apartment, I think it's quite interesting. It's not, it's something that has been thought about a lot, I think.
I love how the apartment is almost, it's like another character, and it's almost like this breathing organism, because we see that it almost like compresses and then expands at any given moment, because there's, as Matthew indicated, there are those shots where it looks a lot bigger and it looks, a lot taller and a lot deeper, and that gives us this like you said, Matt, skewed perspective. But then at the very end, when her break is at like a fever pitch, the apartment compresses and there's that great shot of the ceiling like crushing down on her. So I think that's a really interesting way to convey her emotions through the space around her.
I like the way that even though this is a small apartment, it never really breaks focus on the mapping and where everything is. And I like that about any film that I watch, where I become familiar with a space. And then towards the end, I almost feel like someone who visited the place. And so when they're showing up and I know that the landlord's in the den, I'm kind of going, oh, well, that's the second door on the right. And so I felt like this film did a really good job. Even though it was a small space, it's easy for filmmakers to disregard sort of the memory of where everything is. They just kind of do cuts and they say, what does it matter? This is just supposed to be an apartment. But there's a lot of attention paid to where everything is within this space that by the end of the film, I feel like I've been visiting this place. I know where everything is.
Yeah, agreed. Like the geography is very clearly laid out and remains consistent so that we can recognize, hey, that room was not as big as it was 5 minutes ago.
I want to highlight is how this movie also represents how, the sexual liberation movement from women that was happening in the 60s. Because I've read and I was checking that's the first time you can listen to a female orgasm. Also, when I was watching that for the 12th time, was really surprising. It was like, oh, what now that we are in 2025?
It's racy, right? It's sexy.
Yeah. And also women having affairs, having, sex with men, it was because they wanted to have sex. It's not something that was imposed from outside.
Right.
So I think it's a very interesting thing to watch in the movie, and also Carole's character reacting to this modern way of life she doesn't understand. So in a way, I think he's starting something interesting in the cinema, because if we take a look at Hitchcock's movies that we mentioned before, women are there, no sexual, just there. Right. So I think in that way it's interesting, and also Carole being a murder subject, no murder object, is kind of is related in that sense. I don't know if you agree, don't agree, or it's something that I just saw and I'm making it up.
What are people's thoughts on kind of like the representations of feminine characters and their relation to sex in the film? Because I think we get two very clear sides of it. Like there's a woman who absolutely enjoys sex, and then there's somebody who's repulsed by it.
I think the imagery within the movie is fantastic. We're talking about cracks. We're talking about, too often we'll have representations of penises, phallic stuff that's like, oh, look, now this is going to be a sexual moment. And now we actually have something we're exploring. What's it like to show, instead of something jutting out, something going in. We get to see the exploration of pleasure and pain. We get to see multiple, you don't have to just choose one thing. Your one option is not go be the housewife, have a couple babies, and that is what sex is you have those couple babies. We see people who are choosing to do it in a way that is subversive to a traditional narrative. I'm taking on a lover, a married lover. My concept of time is not that great. But when I think of movies 20 years earlier, 20 years that would have been under the code, like how that would not have been possible.
Mm-hmm.
But now we have this film coming out 65, and it's before we're really getting swinging 60s. We're not getting to Austin Powers yet, but now we're having alternatives show up, and actually alternatives from a woman's point of view. We're not having, yes, a man wrote it. Yes, a man directed it. We are not necessarily having like, oh, this is a man's movie and I'm going to show that a woman can do this in a man-centered movie. We're actually focusing squarely on the women here from their perspective.
Yeah.
I think the, at times, indistinguishability between pleasure and pain is something that's really fascinating about this movie too. I think that goes back to the conversation earlier about some critics' assertion that her encounters with the men in her bedroom might be fantasies. Watching the film this time, when Helen sees what's become of her sister at the very end of the movie, she doesn't have a lot of dialogue. Instead, she does a lot of moaning. it's not really a scream that she does when she sees the chaos in the apartment at the end of the movie. She's almost, yeah, it's almost like a moan. And that like audio cue kind of perversely made me think about her moans of pleasure earlier in the film when she's having sex with her boyfriend, or having her affair with her boyfriend. So I think that's a really like uncomfortable kind of line that the movie straddles between pleasure and pain, and it feels, even today watching it, it feels very radical.
We didn't talk a lot about Polanski's personal life. I can't help but imagine that people's viewing of this film is now colored by what we think about Polanski. I went back and watched the documentary Roman Polanski Wanted and Desired, just to kind of refresh myself on, what the circumstances were around his fleeing the country and, his refusal to come back after he was brought in on charges of underage sexual engagement. I think I had it in my mind that, like, what an asshole this guy must be, and what his feelings are about women. But when you look at this movie, that doesn't seem to be there. This seems to be a very feminist viewpoint. The fact that it is about women and their experience in the world, and that the men are not painted in a flattering light. It is an interesting dichotomy. And I'm curious what people's thoughts are about art and artistry and the separation of the two, and how you view this movie and how you view Polanski these days.
At the beginning, I told you that I have a complicated relation with Roman Polanski, because I've been a fan since I was a teenager. But it is true, with all this happen, I felt really, really bad, and I didn't watch a movie by Polanski till today. So you are responsible of me watching a Polanski movie again. That happened to me with bands such as Rammstein, that I was a big fan, and after all this, chemical submission by singer and etc., I stopped listening to. And many other examples. I think in the case of Polanski, I didn't want to watch the documentary. I'm not interested at all, because I know I'm going to get angry. But I decided not to watch anything related to Polanski. But I love Repulsion. But I think also Polanski went through a very hard time when all the thing of Charles Manson thing, when Sharon Tate was killed, she was pregnant, etc. And I think we should consider that when approaching also Polanski. I think it's a very shocking episode on someone's life, etc. But my relation with him is very complicated. I will talk about the movie, but not about the director.
Yeah.
It does seem all too familiar, just kind of with incidents we've seen post Me Too, where there have been certain figures who have not necessarily practiced what they preach, and that seems to be kind of the case with Roman Polanski, because this film was made before his sexual assault, which was at I can't remember if it was Nicholson or Angelica Houston's house.
It was at Nicholson's house.
Yeah. And I'm not 100% well versed on this current dilemma, but this Justin Baldoni, thank you, Blake Lively, geez, because this guy was someone who practiced feminism and preached that until these accusations came against him, and that's kind of what made me think of that there are these instances of someone who says that they promote this idea, and then later perhaps they don't. And so that kind of came to my mind when watching this.
For sure. I think there's something about being in power and not recognizing you have it, or really wishing you didn't. You just want to be, you perhaps naively assume that, I can be just like everybody else. We're all peers here, right? We're all peers. And that just doesn't end up being true in execution. I had an interesting time watching the end of this movie, because the crime that we're talking about at Nicholson's involved champagne and some downers, I believe.
Quaaludes.
So seeing the lover holding a relatively lifeless Catherine Deneuve and carrying her off. I was like, ooh, this ages differently. This is not, a fortune-telling movie. This is not saying like, this is how I plan to do this in the future. Of course not. It can't help but color something. Actually, similarly, like when I brought up Psycho before the Psycho podcast, knowing Anthony Perkins' history with conversion therapy for homosexuality, and then also seeing how his character is trying to repress and deal with other personalities, you just have a different color. You just go, ooh. Or similarly, something recent that's also darker, the most recent Final Destination movie, knowing that this is Tony Todd's final film and hearing Tony Todd's views on, hey, you never know when life is going to end, so do the most you can with it.
Matthew mentioned earlier this example of almost like layered realities, and you gave the example of the woman who lived below you. I almost feel like what our discussion has been like an exercise in that, because we've just spent an hour and a half talking about how great this movie is, right? And how much we love it and how powerful it is and beautiful it is. We've exercised that. I think you can put those two realities next to one another and accept both, that Polanski has done horrible things and there's no denying that. And then that's on the one hand, and on the other hand, we can look at his work and say, wow, this is still an incredible film. So it's not an easy balancing act by any means. And all of you have shown how our understanding of Polanski and these objectively terrible things he's done can color our viewing of the film. So it's inevitable for the art and the artist to kind of seep into one another. But I think our discussion has illustrated that, that movies like Repulsion obviously are still very much worth watching and discussing and analyzing and appreciating.
Well, and I think that's exactly it, is that when I talk about a movie that is from a problematic filmmaker, I think it's important to discuss both. I don't believe in just canceling a work of art because the artist has transgressed. I do believe that, when an artist has transgressed, that artist needs to make amends, and that perhaps we don't support that artist until those amends are made, and which is why I have a very similar complicated relationship with Polanski. It's like, well, you committed a crime and I don't know what amends were made. Now, there was a civil suit with his survivor, so amends may have been made. He did not come back and answer, to the sentence that was laid out before him, but he has connected with the person who survived his assault, and he has settled a civil suit, and she has publicly forgiven him. That's the kind of amends I need to see an artist make before I can, continue to support them and be interested in them as an artist. But I think it's important that when we talk about the work, we also talk about the artist, and we acknowledge that things are problematic, and we acknowledge that it's complicated, and we explore why it's complicated, and we talk about how it changes our viewing of that artist's work. So I really appreciate everybody being willing to dive into that, that area and talk about it, because I don't think canceling and just pretending like that artist never existed and their art never existed is useful to anybody. I think we have to talk about the art. We have to talk about, because the art is what empowered Polanski. It's what gave him the cachet that you were talking about, Matthew. And it's what allowed him to commit the crime that he did.
I'm a big fan of disrupting a conversation. And I agree, if we cancel people, we're continuing the conversation of these people to be deserving of this power should be on a pedestal. Mm-hmm. And I'm purposely very pro disrupting that and saying, no, people are complicated. People we don't like can make things that we do like, and vice versa. People that we love can make things that we don't like at all.
Yeah. And I don't think art excuses a human being's behavior. I think just because you do something wonderful as an artist affords you the opportunity to be forgiven, just blanket, because I like that person's art. Therefore I would much rather somebody not have to deal with a sexual assault than have a great movie. Like I know enough great movies are going to come my way without enabling some, sexual predator.
That's both a radical statement and such a simple one. Because yes, I would much rather no one have to experience that, of course. And also how profound that it's still something we can say. Yeah.
Wrapping things up, just a few final thoughts on the film, what it means to you, and why it continues to resonate. Let's go ahead and kick things off with Tom.
Again, a main reason I keep coming back to it is Catherine Deneuve and her incredible performance. And I think looking at the apartment trilogy as a whole of Rosemary's Baby and Repulsion and later The Tenant, that those three films are linked broadly thematically, but also each one is very much its own unique thing, and Repulsion is very much its own unique thing. And I every time I watch it, I appreciate it more, and I've grown to appreciate it more because of this conversation too. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Tom. And also, the Tenant happened before the sexual assault, so we're safe there. you can enjoy everything right up until the Tenant, and then it gets weird. Don.
I think this film ages like a fine wine. I mean, especially with today, the depiction of men in this film, it made me think of Alex Garland's recent film Men. That kind of came to mind. But one thing we didn't bring up, and this kind of stuck out to me, was, we have this current male loneliness epidemic because of the way that men behave, and they turn to each other and they scream into an echo chamber and take advice from one another rather than asking, well, maybe we should find out what women want and how they feel. When Colin was influenced by his buddies at the bar, that's one thing that stuck out to me. One of which looked like a poor man's Peter Sellers. But these two guys who are just insecure, they have no emotional investment in this character, but they're saying, well, you didn't get her, you got to go get her. And that's actually part of what provoked him to go break down the door. A lot of that resonated with me when I was watching this. The way that this character was negatively influenced by his two buddies who know nothing about how to mend and form a meaningful relationship. That was his that's it moment. I'm going to go kick down the door. So looking now, we have this sort of what is being referred to in the media, and I think is to a great extent true, this sort of loneliness epidemic with men, because they are listening to podcasts where they're listening to other dudes saying, just go get them, go do what you want to do. And it's still held true, a lot of these ideas. So I think the film really holds up. If anything, maybe even you could argue even holds up better than it did when it came out, when it was released. It still addresses a lot of problems that are going on today. And I appreciated revisiting this in the year 2025.
Yeah, agreed. Thanks, Dad. Matthew?
This is a film I love going back to. If any of the listeners here are not familiar with it, I urge you, please go check it out as soon as you can. This is probably one of my interchangeable. I'm going to say one of my top two films of the depiction of mental illness in cinema, and it's going to be this and Melancholia. They both tie for first as cinematic ways to convey what this can be like for somebody. If anyone is potentially put off by the fact that it's black and white, I urge them to consider it like a Robert Eggers movie. It has a kind of slow burn feel that some of his things do. It's very similar to The Vavitch in that way, which is in color, but check that out. So if you are of the A24, cheerleader crowd, you really like that type of we'll call it elevated horror, or others, we might just call it horror. Please check out this movie. It is absolutely worth your time.
And thank you for your insights, Matthew. I appreciate you bringing your professional insights to the fore. And Elena?
It's a movie that I love because it has different levels of analysis. You can watch from different perspectives and enjoy it just for fun, or just in order to go deeper into the cinema. It deals with a theme that has been covered before, and later on that has been, an influence on different works of cinema. So it's kind of interesting in that sense, with all the female features, etc. Just want to say that in a world like this, be the woman with the dog.
Thank you all so much. What an amazing conversation about an amazing film, and a complicated conversation about a complicated filmmaker. So thank you all. This has been glorious, and looking forward to having you all on again very soon. And until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.